So welcome to ThinkFOOD 5. This is incredibly our 5th year in a row for the ThinkFOOD conference, and we're very happy to have you all here. I'm Marianne Tubin, head of the Center for Food Studies at Simon's Rock. This is a great turnout for a great theme, I think. So this year we decided that our theme was the future of farming. And if you think about it, you're all the future of farming, because you all have some connection to farming, to agriculture, to eating in a way. And what we wanted to do was bring people together to talk about how we could get to democratizing the food system, and what that means to each of us and how we can participate, and especially for students. So I was thinking of, I was talking to somebody who works in tech, and he said that the jobs of the future we can't even imagine yet. Things are changing so quickly, and they'll be so different by the time these students are in the workforce. So I think we can think about that in food as well. Lots of entrepreneurs, we'll meet some of them this afternoon. Lots of ways of changing the food system. And these speakers we have this morning really are doing that. So I want to talk a little bit about their work in a second, but before I do that, I just want to give you some smaller details. Restrooms are in this building, on this floor and downstairs. We'll have lunch in the dining hall, which is just across the way. There are restrooms in there too. If you're eating lunch with us, make sure you have a pink lunch ticket. That's important to get into the dining hall. I want to thank our sponsors. These are our 5-year sponsors. So Guido's very generously provides food for our snacks and for our lunch, and it's an amazing lunch. You'll see the dining hall's done a fantastic job sourcing local produce, local meats, local everything from all over. This is Nick Martinelli's work. He's starting a nascent food hub, and we've worked with him since, I think this is 3 years now, so that's a great connection that we've made. The Nutrition Center, and Peter Stanton is here. They've been our 5-year sponsor. Peter's on our advisory board. And Berkshire Grown, Farmers Oatman is here too, another 5-year member of our advisory board and our conferences. So thanks to all of them, and thank them if you see them. This conference is not possible without our Center for Food Studies team. I want to thank especially Kellyanne McGuire, who has put together the posters that you'll see this afternoon, student posters. And also, if you've got a sticker, she coordinated making the sticker, and the sticker was made by a student, designed by a student, Rachel Sheep. Let's see, Tom Coote is over there, and he will show you the greenhouse and the fish that he's growing over in Fisher Science Center, which you can look at this afternoon. He also is managing our farm, our community garden. Donald McClelland is around here somewhere. He will run, there he is up there. He's giving honey tastings at lunchtime in the Fisher Science Center. He's also running an apiculture course here, and he'll run the campus tree walk at the end of the day. Sarah Snyder is at the desk there. You may have met her, and she's also on faculty in biology, and she'll help you with, not a tour of Fisher, but she can talk to you about all the things that are going on at Fisher Science Center. Brian Meisel is helping out with lots of different things, including the poster and these flowers that come from his Ikebana course that he runs here at Simon's Rock. And Erin McMullen, who I don't think is here yet, but she's also on the faculty. Mo Constantine was outside directing traffic and has helped with lots of different things. Mo is also in charge of ACE credit. If you're a student and you want ACE credit, talk to Mo. And Ebony Martin, who I think is here somewhere. Ebony. So Ebony's also helped us with lots of coordination, and she's here today to help with the conference. So thanks to all of those people. As I said, during lunch, go to Fisher Science Center to see those student posters, to taste some of our local honey, very local, from just over there. The local honey you want to taste, and Donald will walk you through that. There's a campus tree walk at 4 p.m., and Donald promises not to take us too far afield unless you're game for it, so sturdy shoes would be great. But that's 4 o'clock, the end of the conference. And one final thing about the conference itself, you see these pieces of paper at the end of the pew and some pens. Those are what you want to hold on to at the end of this session. We want you to propose roundtable topics. And we have moderators who will run the roundtables. And the roundtables are meant so we can have an interactive conversation. So our moderators are interesting people from all over the food world, and they're going to run the show, but we want lots of participation and lots of interaction. And I'll introduce the moderators at the end of this panel. So I want to introduce our speakers this morning for this first panel, and I think Amani is, hello, welcome. Come on in. So you can look on the other side of your program for the specific details on the people here who are speaking, but I want to talk a little bit about their organizations. So I want to talk with Soulfire Farm, and Amani is here to speak on their behalf. They're in Petersburg, New York, and they're committed to ending racism and injustice in the food system. They're clear about that. That's right there on their website. But how do they do it? They deliver fresh local food by a CSA that accepts SNAP benefits. They're training Black, Latinx, and Indigenous people as farmers and food justice organizers. They host community farm days and workshops, they do training, and they inspire young people of color in their youth program. And so Amani is here to speak to us more about Soulfire Farm. Secondly, we have the National Young Farmers Coalition from Hudson, New York, and they represent, mobilize, and engage young farmers to ensure their success. Again, important if we want to democratize the farm system. They work to support independent family farms, sustainable farming, affordable land for farmers, fair labor practices. They run farmer-to-farmer training, and they invite and sustain farmers of every gender, race, and sexual orientation. They run multiple campaigns and workshops for farmers of all ages, even though it's called the National Young Farmer Coalition. And recently, in fact, they began a campaign to propose that young farmers be part of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program so that you can have your student loans forgiven if you become a farmer, because farming is public service. So it's an interesting campaign. Look on the website for more details. And finally, Gardening the Community in Springfield is a food justice organization engaged in youth development, urban agriculture, and sustainable living to build healthy and equitable communities. GTC runs a farm share, a mobile market, and they'll soon open a community farm stand. They have a youth training program focused on building healthy and equitable communities, and their food makes its way to local restaurants, to bodegas, and even home to the students' families. They use no pesticides, no herbicides. They deliver their produce on bikes, so they don't even add to the carbon footprint by delivering their produce. And they use rain collection for irrigation. So these are people really on the ground changing the food system directly. And we're very happy, we're delighted to have all of these speakers here. And they're going to each speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. And again, think about those themes for the roundtables as you're listening. Write them down when you have them. And I'll give you a chance to do that before lunch. So I'd like to invite Imani Ibrahim from Gardening the Community, Lindsay Lesher-Shute from the National Young Farmers Coalition, and Amani Olubala from Soulfire Farm. Please welcome all of our speakers. Thank you.
First.
You decide. You're already speaking.
Everybody's looking at me. Is this all right? Thank you for inviting me here today to talk about our organization, Gardening Community. My name again is Ibrahim Ali. I'm one of two executive directors of the program, the other one being Ann Richmond. We have about, I want to say, 5 staff total. Many of them never had any farming experience before, including myself. And we've been looking at our farm system, our food system in Springfield, very much in detail for many years. And when I became the director of Gardening Community, a lot of things have already happened in this field of work in Springfield. I can really speak mostly on our particular neighborhood, the one in which I live in also, which is the Six Corners area of Springfield. Gardening Community started in 2002. It was a project under NOFA, which is, I'm sure some of you are familiar with that, Northeast Organic Farm Association. And they wanted to have a project, they wanted to start something in the city of Springfield that would involve youth, similar to what was found in Boston in the food project. So the first director, Ruby Maddox, and another farmer by the name of Jonathan Bates were kind of the foundational piece of Start Gardening Community. And a very interesting piece to this is that the original space that we were on was a community garden. It was established as a result of a house that was torn down in the neighborhood. Some terrible things happened to some kids in the building, so the neighborhood got together, decided they wanted to tear the building down, and they created this community garden. So that's where Gardening Community had its start. So from there began what I like to say is just our kind of starting contentious relationship with the city of Springfield around the work that we do. When they wanted to take the land back, well, they did take the land back, and they gave us another property around, kind of down the street a little bit, in a location called 488 Central Street. And our, kind of this having space, having land, was a continuing process for us. So after leaving or being kind of thrown out of the original site, the original community garden, we was at 48, They were operating there for maybe about a year, and then the city took that space back too. Fortunately, it's between a area that has very questionable activities and another area that has even more questionable activities. So nobody wanted to build there, so eventually they did give us that space back. But in the meantime, the director at that time, Kristen Brennan, she decided to approach this company, the last manufacturing company in this neighborhood, Mitchell Machine. And he said, when she initially talked to him about these properties, that one, there was an abandoned house on the corner, he owned this other little space, she wanted to farm there, and then there was another space, I'm sorry, on Lebanon Street, which is right around the corner. And he said no. Luckily, she was wise enough to speak with the secretary, who had a kinship to what we were doing, growing food, working with young people. So she convinced the owner, you know, he's kind of what I think of the guys that run that place. It's like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, but maybe a little bit softer on the edges, I would think. So he said no, she said, and then eventually said yes. So then we were on 256 Hancock Street and 49 Lebanon, and then the city again gave us back 488 Central, which has since been converted to a community farm, but I can talk about that later if you wish. So 3 sites. When we felt as though we wanted to do things on our Hancock Street location, we usually employ the philosophy of you do the thing and ask for forgiveness later. So in this case, we built a hoop house, and the Mitchell Machine, the guy who owns this machine, wasn't too happy with the situation. He kind of wanted us to take it down. It's like it became like the thing that we don't speak about, because we haven't mentioned it since, he hasn't mentioned it since, and the hoop house is still standing. So I think we learned our lesson in terms of, you know, being able to do that, but also realizing that if we wanted to kind of continue in this process, we were going to need to own our own piece of property in some shape or form and make that happen. So after an exhaustive search, which included walking about a block away, we decided that we would purchase a property on 200 Walnut Street, which is like about maybe a quarter of an acre piece of land. It couldn't be better because it was already near our other locations. And we began a process of figuring out how we were going to try to get this purchase of land, which fortunately was owned by the city of Springfield, which I want to make a big note of that. So we, you know, looked at the political situation. We decided that it was important to get the people around the property, so the neighbors. We spoke to the different neighbors that lived on the block. We then approached the neighborhood councils, which are these members of the community. The city kind of adheres to some of their suggestions many times. So we got like all of the neighborhood councils that were kind of touching our neighborhood involved in the project, and we had kind of built those relationships up. We know people who sat on those councils. We approached the people at City Hall one by one, just kind of letting them know what we were doing. And over time, we developed a real good kind of feeling that maybe we could do this purchase. There was someone from the city that, because it was a city-owned property, they could kind of restrict the development of the site to cater to what we were doing, which was very helpful. But it still didn't mean, or it still wasn't like a surefire thing in terms of if someone else came with a proposal to build like one of the numerous gas stations that seems to open up in our area. That could have been a possibility too, but fortunately we were the only ones that made a bid, and so we were able to purchase the land from the city and begin what I would like to call our future in farming, which is the development of our 200 Walnut Street site and the building of this farmstead. I think for us, being in the city of Springfield, the population is kind of changing. There's a lot of things happening in terms of this casino that's being built and how that's going to impact things in our city. So we're kind of wrestling with all of that, plus we are at our core a youth development program. We are very serious about putting our young people in positions of leadership, seeing them as the future, maybe not necessarily of farming, but the future of eating. And so it's important that we instill in them the type of things that we have come to understand about food, and how food has been used to manipulate the actual essence of human beings and change what is used to be considered something that should be a right for everyone into all these other things that have resulted in our community really not having any food choices at all. Most of what is available has been, or what is kind of found in bodegas, it's fast food, it's chips, it's all the Eatos, so Doritos, Cheetos, Fritos, everything you could imagine. And a lot of fast food, and it kind of has been continuing on that downward spiral for a long time. There used to be 3 at least supermarkets in the neighborhood, from what I was told, in the 70s and 80s, and that has since dwindled down to like -45. And so our option and why we had initially been kind of supporting the return of a grocery store to the neighborhood, and the big players of the supermarket world in our community all did not want to come into the neighborhood for various reasons, some of which I think are very questionable. But I would say the one that we heard from the last major operator was that there wasn't any money there. And so we, having this opportunity to purchase land, having an opportunity to create the kind of space that we felt was needed, and from what our constituents, our community members, the citizens who live in the neighborhood, the young people, what they had stated that they wanted was something that will open up the doors for more fresh food into our neighborhood. And it's very it's a really good thing because, one, obviously we're instilling in these young people these values around food that are very important and crucial. But the other thing is that we're multi-generational, multiracial, etc. And we find that our ability to go into our neighboring towns and what have you and work with other farmers has expanded what is going to be possible for our farmstead. So we work with many farmers outside of Springfield on trying to figure out what are the best ways to bring more food into our city. There is so I don't know if the future for us is going to be some shape or form of a food hub or something. One of the things that we find that is missing in our area is that there's no real community kitchen. There's no space where people can really kind of utilize some of these other techniques, as I've seen in other cities. When I say there are communities, not community, there are like quality kitchens. I mean, we are in the 20th century, the 21st century. But there's no, there's no place for that type of thing to happen, to take place. So I think that's something that we would like to see happen in the future. But we're completely new to the farm stand world. Like I spent most of my day yesterday trying to understand what the electric and amperage and wattage situation is of like refrigeration. So we're really at that level of trying to figure out what to do and what to purchase. So looking ahead, I think that's 20 minutes?
No.
It's like 10 minutes, excellent. So what we have, so the other aspect of our land, the purchase that we made was that we also lost one of our other properties. We lost the Lebanon Street site. So our investment in having our own land is even more magnified now since we did lose another parcel of space no more than 2 years ago. And we had been farming and working on that area for about 7 to 8 years. So it was kind of, very upsetting for many of the youth because there really wasn't any change and there was nothing that we could really do about that. Land is an issue that I think extends not just to our city in terms of what we've had to deal with, but when you look around the country, definitely And I can say this because one of the people that we work with, who I was like as a consultant for us, is Miss Lincoln Smith, and she has a project called the Black Land Project, where she talks about the kind of decline that has taken place for people of color, particularly black people, owning land. I think it's at the lowest rate that even it was in the 19th century. So it's a very serious kind of situation, because what that means is that there's going to be a lot of lost culture that has come and stemmed from, you know, this ownership of people of color and what kind of things they grow and how they manage and deal with the farm. I've never been to any southern farm. I've never had that experience, but I know that for us, you know, we know that a lot of the history of what we do now, the foundation of the CSA itself, comes from black people, and so we want to be clear and have this relationship with the land that our young people oftentimes see as, you know, what they see in the history books. They don't want to do that work. We can't necessarily tell them that, yeah, as soon as you join God in the community, you could go out and get 20 acres of land somewhere in Hadley and make it happen. So we have to be realistic in terms of what we are able to instill in our youth, who might not come into this with the idea of being a farmer, but like I said before, like it's very important for them to identify with the work that's taking place and to really commiserate with the people who are growing the food, who are, you know, picking and harvesting the food on all levels of our food system, and we try to, you know, make sure that they have those connections. So when they see food, they don't just think of their growling stomach, they think of the work that is involved in producing, you know, every single thing that they see. And that in and of itself, I think, can really affect what the future might be. Right now, we have a farm bill wherein, you know, there is a debate, and there's people actually, you know, considering not having some of the things in place that allow people to eat well, or maybe just survive. And I think that, you know, we're not a political organization, but politics plays a big part in farming, I think. I think with farming and through farming, you can really instill some of these values that we think are going to be important for our young people in Springfield. So I guess for thinking about ways that we are changing the city of Springfield, as you mentioned, you know, the farm stand will be like the biggest project that we've taken on. It's about the size of this space here, maybe a little bit smaller. And it's a big presence on a very busy street. And we're hoping that, you know, it works and that it becomes successful. That's it. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Lusher-Shute, and I'm the Executive Director and Co-Founder of Young Farmers Coalition. I'm sure, in different contexts and with different programs and different organizations and approaches, there's like so much in common in the urban and rural context, which is what most of our work deals with in terms of farming and agriculture. So my story begins with farming and with activism. Nationally Owned Farmers Coalition was founded by myself and 2 other farmers in 2010 is when we got started. And the idea for the coalition came together a few years really before that. And how it all got started, essentially, was in 2004, my husband, Ben, moved up to the Hudson Valley to start a farm. Ben and I had actually met in New York City doing community gardening work. Right after college, I moved to a place where I could find an apartment that I could afford in Brooklyn and Williamsburg, East Williamsburg, right across from a metal recycling plant, and down the street from an abandoned community garden that was essentially being held by a community organization eventually to build housing on. And they had locked the garden. It was, there was a car in there. It was full of junk. There was a lot of issues with that site. But the main problem was it was not accessible to the community. And I, in this neighborhood, felt like I really wanted some green space. And so I was able to work with neighbors at that time to open the garden and clean it up, and we eventually were able to get New York City to adopt it as a permanent park and garden. So that was like my actually first experience in agriculture and farming. I'm from Columbus, Ohio, where farming is, in terms of land and sort of community, in some respects, more accessible, right? But I would say New York City, in fact, the city itself, unlike Columbus at the time growing up, is much more connected to its farms with CSAs and just with the interaction of local agriculture in the city and the availability of food that you can eat, which strangely, in Ohio, growing up, they're just like in our schools or farmers markets or whatnot, that just wasn't available. And it's the world has really changed in that respect, even in Ohio now, which is good. But in any case, New York City, that community garden was really my first experience planting things, growing food. We certainly grew quite a bit of food there, but really for me, the exciting part was having the opportunity to be involved in my community, being an outsider, having a platform and a project to work together on with neighbors, and then of course work together to fight for the future of that garden. And in the process of working on that garden, and actually at a rally at City Hall for community gardens in New York City is where I met my husband, Ben, who is from New York City, has no farming he can point to at all in his background. And after college, he had the opportunity to go and apprentice at a farm in Oregon, and came back after a year to the city, and he just had farming in his blood. And he was working at an organization, but farming on his roof, farming at another community garden, and then eventually came to work at what is now the Red Shed Community Garden in Brooklyn. And eventually community gardening didn't afford him enough space to grow, and his roof was overflowing. So he found a parcel and a business partner where he could farm in Red Hook, New York, which is about 45 minutes an hour from here. And the first farm where Ben and Brianna Davis, his business partner at the time, started off was an old dairy farm owned by Pete and Alice locally, and they gave him that farm to use, about 5 acres at the time, just for a handshake for free. And that's where our farm got started. And about, 3 or 4 years after the farm got going, it's a CSA farm, Party Roots Community Farm is the name of that operation. The couple passed away, the farming couple passed away. And at this time, we had really built a successful farm operation. We had, at that time, about 600 people in our CSA at Hardy Roots, and we were renting land in 2 locations at that time. We're delivering back to that community garden in New York City and to several sites also around the city in different boroughs. And in the Hudson Valley. And when Pete and Alice passed away, their farm went on the market for about $3 million. And we soon moved from that farm because there was really no future for us there. We were renting another parcel, thankfully, sort of at the same time, so we had a place to go. But on that parcel, we couldn't build any permanent infrastructure. And so when we were thinking about our future in farming and how we were going to be able really to make a career of farming and farm in such a way that we were going to be able to support ourselves and our families for a lifetime. We clearly understood that we needed, as you were saying, a piece of land where we could really invest and build the infrastructure that we needed, wash and pack facilities, cooling, cold storage, all of the rest that, farms, as you may or may not know, are highly regulated, right? So the way you wash your vegetables, how you're cooling them, how you're handling them, how you're storing them, there are laws that dictate how you need to do that. But there's also consequences in terms of quality and so on. You need to, and quality of the produce, quality of life for the employees with loading docks and all the rest. So there were many things that we wanted on our farm that we were not able to really create at our existing rental. So we went out and we looked for land to buy. Nothing in our community was less than $1 million. Which is what we felt like we could afford on a farming income and what would be a good business decision for us. And at the same time, when Ben and I were struggling with figuring out how we were going to find a place to keep our farm going and to build our farm operation, we knew one of our co-founders was in a situation where they were renting land from a non-farmer and was asked to leave mid-season, and then was in a legal dispute throughout the rest of that season trying to get their produce out of the ground. Thankfully they had a good lease, but it was extraordinarily stressful, and we were hearing similar stories from all across the country of young people who had so much potential to change our food system in the future, but were essentially extraordinarily vulnerable as they were getting started and didn't have the land access and security that they needed to really make a go of it. So Ben, while he was upstate farming and I was helping as I could, I throughout that time was living in New York City doing organizing and activism, actually on transportation, totally different issue. I was working doing state policy for an organization called Transportation Alternatives, working on public transportation funding and various bills in Albany. And that organization has a grassroots network of thousands in New York City that mobilize for action. And from that experience, I was wondering why we as young farmers weren't mobilized, right? Why we weren't organized, why we weren't going and telling the story that Ben and I were facing, and why other young farmers in their own regions didn't have a platform to go and speak to their members of Congress and their state legislatures about the challenges that they were facing in agriculture and working together to really craft solutions that were appropriate for their needs. So we decided to do something about that. So in 2009, we started to talk with farmers all around the country about this idea of forming a political coalition to address the challenges that young and beginning farmers were facing all over the country. There was training available for us, but it didn't matter if we were trained. If there wasn't any place to farm, it wasn't going to make any difference. So Ben and our other co-founder together presented this idea at the Stone Barns conference in 2009 and said, what do you all think about starting a coalition, a National Young Farmers Coalition? And there was sort of a resounding yes. So in 2010, the coalition was formally launched. So since then, our program work has developed in 3 areas. We do a lot of policy work. We worked on the last Farm Bill. We're working on this Farm Bill now, this year, and maybe we'll have a Farm Bill, maybe we won't. We can certainly talk about that. So we do policy work on the federal level. We also do policy work on the state level. Young Farmers Coalition, another part of our work is grassroots organizing. We now have 40 chapters in 29 states. These are volunteer groups led by young and beginning farmers. And those chapters are leading some of our work on the state level as well. We currently have bills in New Mexico and Colorado and in New York State. These are bills that are all addressing structural challenges that young and beginning farmers are facing. And then we also offer business services for farmers. So right now that consists of trainings on credit, on food safety, on how to access land. And the other sort of theme of our work that we do not, it's a theme of our work, we say, because it runs through all of our work, it informs our work, is racial equity is a really important part of our work and something that we seek to address in every aspect of our training, of our policy work on the federal level and the state level, and also our grassroots work. We strongly believe that the future of agriculture needs to be available to everyone, and we need to create opportunity and address specific challenges that people are having. And we frequently talk about the fact that the most talented young people in agriculture are often some of our farm workers that have come that right now do not have citizenship status that will allow them to access any federal programs. Currently, if you are not a citizen, you can't use USDA programs. So that's a major missed opportunity for the country. So that is something that we weave into all aspects of our work, and we are very strongly trying to just create a community of farmers that is highly inclusive and will present opportunity for many young people in agriculture for the future. So I guess there's a bunch of things I could speak about, but I guess the question Marianne posed was, what about students interested in getting involved in the food system? And I would just say that there are many opportunities to do that. I guess a couple that I can speak about. Number one would be you can farm. I don't know if anyone here is thinking about farming, but we need young farmers. Farmers under 35 are few and far between. For each farmer under 35, there are 6 over 65 right now in the country. Average age of farmers is now 58. Between the last 2 censuses of agriculture, we lost 95,000 farmers in the United States. So we need you. So if you're interested in farming, I encourage you to pursue that, and the best first step is really to go and find a farmer that you respect and work with them. Get a job, get your hands dirty, get started. Another way to get involved with Young Farmers Coalition in particular, and advocacy in agriculture, is certainly to engage with Young Farmers Coalition's chapter networks. We have a Hudson Valley Network chapter that has about 300 folks in it, and some Berkshire people come over to that group, so you're most welcome to participate in that way, or to start a chapter here or in the region. We'd be excited to help with that. And I guess the other thing I would say is, there is so much opportunity, I would say, in advocacy and policy work in food and agriculture. Smart, motivated people, creative people can make an incredible difference in this field. We see that in people who hold office, who hold public office, who are able to be open-minded and think about the challenges that new farmers are facing, and be willing to really fight for that change in the legislature. There is tons of opportunity for getting involved in state government and in agencies for agriculture, state departments of agriculture, at the USDA. You know, there is, we've just seen some of the most innovative programs, little things, little changes that can make all the difference. One of the biggest challenges that we addressed early on at Young Farmers Coalition was this fact that USDA loans were really only serving the largest producers. Farm Service Agency agents would be very comfortable giving loans of hundreds of thousands of dollars, but if you're walking into the office and wanted a loan of like $10,000, they would turn you away. And the only reason for that was that they didn't have an appropriate loan product available for small producers. And so we pointed this out to them, and before Congress acted, which eventually they did in the last Farm Bill to do this in a permanent way, someone at USDA said, that's a great idea, let's change it. And so they started a micro-lending program with us, and that micro-lending program has now served tens of thousands of farmers all across the country with loans up to $50,000, and the turnaround period is very quick. So that eventually did become law, that program, but initially it was just someone at the Department of Agriculture saying, that's a great idea, I'm going to take the steps necessary, which are many, right? Working in a bureaucracy, it's definitely not easy, but they said, I'm willing to work with you and I want to see some change happen. So I think government is a great place to make change as well. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amani Alabala. I am the Assistant Director of Programs at Soul Fire Farm. And I do a lot of things when I'm not farm-related things. I still feel like I'm like a training farmer because I do a lot of education and I don't spend my hands in the dirt as much as I would like to. But I need to claim my farmerness, especially because there's like less than, 2% of the farmers in this country are Black folks. And so this is important. In addition to farming things, I do music things, I do community organizing things. And in about maybe 2014, I was working with a youth group in Albany's inner city. And so I ended up in this job where I had to help grow food. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I really don't know what I'm doing at all. But we're gonna just Google everything, it's gonna be fine. And so we learned it together. And Soul Fire was offering free programming for young people who lived in the area, young people of color particularly. And so I was like, okay, we're gonna bring these young people up. And I fell in love. So much of my work at the time was around racial justice and just underscoring the fact that Black lives matter and we need to see it from the top down. And so when I came to Soul Fire, that's where I learned that food-related illnesses were the #1 killer of Black and brown folks, curable, preventable illnesses. And that these things and these circumstances were intentional. It wasn't an accident the way that our food system is right now. Has anybody heard of the term food desert? Has anybody heard the term food apartheid? Okay, and so I asked that question, but okay, we're gonna let that sit right there. What I'd like to do is just kind of share a verse from a song. It's kind of cheesy flow, I feel, but it's powerful words and they're from my heart. I went in for our Black and Latinx Farmer Immersion. It's a program that we offer to folks of all ages who are looking to join the food system and become advocates for themselves and their communities. And so I fell in love. I proselytized about it to all of my friends, and we worked together on a song to honor somebody who was taken in our community, innocent man who was shot by the Albany Police Department, Dante Ivy. And so my best friend and I, we did a remake of each other's verses to that song for what we called the Black Farmer Shuffle. And just my second verse is, I pick my crops in the presence of ancestors. These taters here got me thinking of Graham's dresser when we was on a half-plant, half-processed diet. This Brooklyn, New York girl, so defiant, roar like a lion, try to silence me, not knowing that I'm the lettuce and the topping to this salad. Looking at Soul Fire Farm, they got us started. We upgrowing every day, no space to be broken-hearted, cause when they wanna nip your bud, what that say about you? You ripe and fit to overcome, that's what that say about you. Feel the wind around you, see how ancestors move, we see them elaborate ways they show they care about you. Self-knowledge is our wealth. Come on, somebody, when you learn how to grow. Don't hurt nobody. Take your crops in a bag, and mother loving devil. Take that love to the field and hit that black farmer shuffle. We gonna grow anyway, though they've taken all the land. We gonna overcome before, and we gonna do it again. Not tonight, it's alright. We ain't dying no more. Not tonight, it's alright. We ain't buying no more. I believe that we will win, our future full of seeds. And we ain't dying no more. Not tonight, it's alright. We ain't crying no more. Not tonight, it's alright. We ain't dying no more. And at the beginning of that song, instead of, thank you so much. At the beginning of the song, we don't say, I believe that we will win, our future's full of seeds. We say, I said they can't stop our movement if they can't find our seeds. And that is a reference to just the rich history and untold history about folks of color and land in our country, the power and the sacredness of seed, of hope and knowledge. Like when before folks were kidnapped from the continent of Africa and shipped across the diaspora, ancestral grandmothers hid seeds into their hair. They braided seeds into their children's hair, and not knowing where they were going to go and where they were going to end up, but confident or holding on to the hope of being able to plant and grow food and maintain autonomy and a relationship with the land. And it's like that, so there's this long history of folks of color and connection to this land and all land, but it's the history of racism that just kind of creates this separation and this lack of knowledge getting trickled down to just regular old citizens, but particularly young folks and young growers of color potentially. And so also along with that hidden history, we lose all these like heroes, heroines, and non-binary folk gender champions of food justice. And so we have all this trauma, which, in reference to the song, I'm talking about just reconnecting with the land despite a segregation, a separation from that basis of power. Malcolm X has a quote and he says that land is the basis of all equity, of all freedom, justice. And we can see in the civil rights movement how powerful land was. Like, who had the power? There was a quote, I can't remember who exactly said it, but they say that there would have been no civil rights movement without black farmers. And that's because they were the only folks in the South who were going to host folks who were coming from the North who were advocating for racial justice, and they held power of their land. No one was going to be able to kick them off, unlike sharecroppers who might have been borrowing land or leasing, like the stories you were telling us about just a moment ago. And so without those, like no one else was taking these people into hotels or like fixing shoes and so forth. So without that power base, like you think about probably, like the largest movement for justice in the 19th century in our country, it wouldn't have happened. And so that's important. That's important for us to know and for us to remember, because like you were really only telling us, like our young people so often don't want to do this work because there is like such an association with slavery or just all these other kinds of traumatic experiences on land that happened after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. And your project makes me want to talk a little bit about some things that we are doing at Soulfire in terms of restorative justice to create alternatives to prison for young people, and hopefully we'll have some time to talk about that. But I want to just pin that, supporting myself and my ADD, just like, okay, we're going to get back to that. And if I don't, y'all can ask me. And so, and like, so folks carry that trauma with them in their DNA. Like, there's so much science coming out now saying how people carry those things for generations, even if they haven't experienced them. And so we must heal. Like, if as a nation we are going to have any kind of growth and movement forward, we all have to heal, because it's the ignorance and the non-healing, it feeds more of what you were saying, questionable activity. And I think there was a great quote I read recently. It might have been Ta-Nehisi quotes. I'm not quotes, Ta-Nehisi quotes. I'm not sure. But I think he said, white people created the ghetto and now they want to complain about it, essentially. That's like my oversimplification of it. But my edit of that oversimplification would be white supremacy created the ghetto. And so that's to say that while none of us in this room created the system that we live within, we all know some of us are impacted from it in far more dangerous, disgusting ways. And so that's relevant for me to mention because it isn't something that is inherent to our nation. It isn't something that isn't, well, actually it is. It's built into the history of our nation, the whole legacy of our nation, poets. It's not something that's inherent to us as people, as like humans, as civilization. We can do something different because the system was created. So bringing it back to food apartheid, at Soul Fire Farm, we use that term because we feel like it more accurately captures what's happening in the food system. Deserts are naturally occurring phenomena that happens. It's, Earth does it, it's natural. But what's happening in the food system is the result of a legacy of racism. And so we have to acknowledge that it's a really complex situation that none of us really are ever showed the whole depth of if we're going to create any kind of solutions. And you were talking about your friends renting land and being forced to leave. And that just makes me think about the story of every sharecropping black farmer in this country. It makes me think about all of the folks who, after the Emancipation Proclamation was passed, were basically required to work in positions that were just like slavery, and just, without, by other names. And so it makes me think about, I don't know, you can actually, is anybody familiar with the Black Codes? Okay, I would have raised my hand if I was you anyway, so I'm far in the back, I'm not going to make you call out. But what if I say, do you want to tell us about it? Would you have an answer?
Me?
Would you like to? Sure.
Yeah, they were codes that were enacted basically to make sure that black people after slavery still had to work the land. You could be arrested for vagrancy, and you could be, basically it made it so that black people would be arrested very easily, and then the prisons had an agreement with the agricultural sector, and they would just be sold back into agriculture, and then have to work for no money, and it could be treated however the farmers felt like they wanted to be treated.
Precisely. Thank you so much. And so that's what a lot of folks don't know. It's let's say 1864 Emancipation Proclamation gets passed, folks are free. Then the next year, basically, it becomes illegal to be black. Not technically, though. That's the first time we see these laws on the books for vagrancy or loitering. We didn't see those things before. And so, literally, you and your two homies are hanging out, just having a conversation, and that's considered loitering, and you're now susceptible to being arrested. And once you're arrested, you can be leased out. Convict leasing was the program. And you can be leased out to folks who were formerly owners of human beings. And so that would happen, or there would be vagrancy laws against not having a job. And so nobody's trying to hire you, literally you were not even considered a human being last year. No one's interested in hiring you, but you don't have a job, you can go to jail. And so we see the beginning of the roots of our mass incarceration system right there, and we still see that happening today. Soul Fire, we have that Project Grow program I mentioned, and that's an opportunity for young people, instead of going through the criminal justice system, to work the land, earn money for their time on the land, and be able to use that money to pay towards what would have been decided during some kind of civil process, what would be an appropriate amount of money to pay back. Most of the time, the young people's offenses were less than $500. It'd be things that for loitering sometimes. And we see all these instances where young people are being charged for the same kinds of things that ancestral grandparents in the South were charged for and fed right into this system that continues today. And so that was happening at the end of the slavery era, as well as all of these instances of terrorism against folks just for being black. People would have their soil poisoned, their livestock poisoned. People would just do all of these really disgusting acts to interrupt any kind of wealth and development, and really scare people into staying in their place. And so all that was happening. I think there was an era where 200 lynchings were reported within a 2-year period, and that's just astonishing when we consider that those are the reported ones. Like, there's like countless ones that are not. There are stories of like thousands of people coming to see lynchings and being advertised in newspapers, and children being held on shoulders to make sure that they could get like a proper view, make sure young people knew the right way for life to be in the South and in the country. And so all of that was happening, but ironically enough, the number one interrupter of Black land ownership, Black farmer ownership, like you were saying, it was, anybody know who's the number one party responsible? I can give you multiple choice if you're interested. The KKK, the USDA, or the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA. Oh, that is a good guess. I got something to say about them when we move towards the north. A little bit about redlining and just all these government policies that made it so we see it where like supermarkets don't want to invest in quote unquote questionable neighborhoods. But these neighborhoods were literally marked off as undesirable by the Federal Housing Administration for loans and things like that, simply because Black folks, Latinx folks, indigenous folks, and Italian folks at the time, Italian folks wasn't even white back then, were in these neighborhoods. So FHA, yes, for the next question. So it leads it to the USDA and the KKK. Who could it be?
Go with option B.
On the friend. Okay.
USDA.
Absolutely. It is the U.S. Department of Agriculture, sadly. And so, a lot of these like microloans and other kinds of like policies that are coming forth now are in recognition of that this like at least 60 years, not 60 years, 40 years at least on record of discrimination. But we know it was from before that, because that's when a department opened in the U.S. Department, the U.S. Department on, it was just like civil rights or something, I think it was, like civil rights administration. They looked into what was happening in mostly the South, where there were these farm advisory boards where folks were supposed to be in charge of making sure loans and other kinds of support got to farmers. And so, hey, there's a drought last month. All the farmers are lining up to come and get their loans from the USDA. It's great, you're a farmer, you're growing food, it's supposed to be supported by the government, and everybody's getting all these loans, except for the Black farmers. And so, it would be, most of the time it would be just like Black folks indiscriminately, but most often it would be folks who became politically organized. And so folks who started, who joined the NAACP, folks who registered to vote. Like Fannie Lou Hamer did so much work at the Freedom Farm, and like she's just like an incredible organizer and civil rights activist. But she went up to wherever, like the capital of wherever her area was. She went to register to vote. She came home the next day and was like kicked off her farm. She was sharecropping. And sharecropping was basically like a debt peonage system where folks kind of, like really similar to what we were hearing about, just like rented land, rented seeds, rented all the kind of resources from these landowners. They didn't have any say over like what they grew, or even like just the ability to grow food for themselves and their families. It was, this is what you need to grow. Oh, you didn't pay me what you owe me more. You're kind of just still in this situation. It was very similar to slavery. And so Fannie Lou Hamer was kicked off her farm for signing up to vote or joining the NAACP, and was then super motivated and organized to just like bring freedom, true freedom and equality for folks of color, and the ability to just simply grow for and sustain ourselves. There's a really great documentary that features the Sherrods, Charles and Shirley Sherrod, who invented the land trust. We're talking about lost history, and we're talking about land and how critical it is and how difficult it is to buy. And so these folks started the first land trust, but there's a documentary where there are people talking about, we thought that if we just kind of like, got ourselves together or like, fended for ourselves, fed ourselves, worked, we're self-determining, like white folks would just be like, oh, okay, that's cool, we're gonna leave the black folks alone. Obviously they're doing their thing, but that wasn't the case. So we just see all of these instances of interruption of what could have been like the development and flourishing of communities. So I'm gonna speed up because I know I'm running close to time. They didn't receive the kinds of resources that they needed in order to sustain themselves, their farms, and their families. And we saw 14% of the nation's farms, I think, were owned by black folks at the height of black land ownership in the 1910. And now it's less than 2% of the nation's farms. I mean, it's disgusting. There is some hope in that it was less than 1%, so it is on the rise. But it's going from 14 to 2%. And there was a bunch of things that happened in between then and now, like the United States had the New Deal, FDR, everybody remembers that, except there were two groups of people who weren't included in that, and that was domestics and farm workers. At the time, mostly those jobs were filled by black folks. And so it was a way to exclude particular populations of folks and make it more difficult to develop any kind of autonomy. And that's why we still see nowadays some farmers don't have like the same kind of minimum wage requirements, and we see people who work in the food industry have a different minimum wage. That is all rooted in this like racist history. And we heard a little bit about the FHA. People can look into that on their own, but those were the kinds of policies that made it so. I think the wealth gap I read somewhere recently at the time before redlining and the Great Migration was 3 to 1 white folks to black folks, and I think I read somewhere recently that it was 13 to 1 now. And so what happened with mortgages and like racism in lending and like neighborhoods being segregated and schools being underfunded, all of those things feed what we see now as a food apartheid system where there is so much money in communities towards food that isn't actually food. I love that you said negative 45 supermarkets. Not love it because it's funny or anything, but loved it because I was thinking about the abundance of crap food that are in our neighborhoods, and like negative is right. Like the top killers of black and brown folks are food and diet related illnesses. This is directly related. Now, upstate New York where I live, it used to be full of farms and like small farmers and things like that. That was the basis of the rural economy, and now it's based in prisons. And so we see this continuation of these loss of land and addition of just more systems of incarceration is all linked together. And so the work that we do at Soulfire is really to interrupt that and to train the next generation of farmer activists, also to work with folks of all races to uproot racism. And so we offer trainings, we do doorstep delivery of fresh vegetables that are organic and like culturally relevant and delicious to people's doorsteps every week when we do our CSA. That CSA, like you said, was started by black folks, was started by Booker T. Watley, who was like, hey, we'll have this clientele membership program that's pick and pay. We can have these urban folks who used to be having their hands deep in the earth and had that relationship with the earth that we all deserve, that healing space. We all deserve to not just be forced to experience nature deficit disorder. Richard Louv coined that term, and it's key when we understand all of the healing benefits that we are being denied, and all the medicinal, all the spiritual benefits that we're being denied when our access to land is cut off. And so we do doorstep delivery of food. We train people, we put on dope parties, we write literature, and we love to answer questions because I think I'm out of time, but thank you so much. Thank you.
Great transition. So we do have time for questions. I welcome any questions to any of our speakers. Thanks to Ibrahim and Lindsay and Amani. So if you have questions for anybody, please speak up.
So I don't want to be a farmer, but I'm trying to get my family into like having a garden in general. So do you see like people who are younger, who aren't like, necessarily willing to be a farmer as a profession, but are still interested in having their own independent supply of food, and how does that sort of work with only being there like halfway? Is that existing?
Anybody?
I'm happy to answer. Yes, I mean, I think there's definitely been a surge of folks who are interested in growing their own food in one way or another, if it's in their backyard or on their rooftop or whatnot. And I mean, go for it. Yes, I mean, and also support your local farms at the same time, because we see at our, so our farm is CSA. We have many home gardeners that are part of our CSA and love to be part of that, and we give them gardening tips and all the rest. But then they're like, oh well, you grew like, you know, 8 successions of lettuce and we grew 1. So right, like we keep it going. So I think that there's like a real partnership there. And yeah, it's gardening is where so many people are starting their food careers. It's accessible. It's what you have. So absolutely, that's a great place to start. And it's, you know, nourishing for the soul, as you're saying.
I would add that, you know, depending on where you live, you want to think about what that soil is. I know for us, even on one of our sites, actually the former site that we were at, and we were in the Let's Build Gardens for Everybody business for a short amount of time, but then we started to really realize that everywhere we were going were these houses that were built, you know, in the late 19th century or so, and so a lot of the paint in some of these neighborhoods has, you know, traditionally fallen into the soil. And I'm working with young people, so it wouldn't be, you know, ethical for me to have them touching that kind of soil. So my suggestion, just on the farmer's side of the game, if you're going to do that, get a soil test, see what you're working with before you start subjecting your family to poison. Before you start really getting into the soil, you want to know what's going on in the soil. That's my suggestion.
I'm not sure both of you could probably discuss it, but if there's so much problems with, you know, government agencies being an impediment for land access historically, and then you're looking at USDA microloans, still not enough to get to the land, like how important are these? I don't feel like there's a lot of them, like Dirt Capital or Iroquois Land Trust out of Chicago. Like, how involved are you guys with them, and how are those people getting in touch? It doesn't seem like there's enough deals being done to get young farmers onto land.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
And promising farmers.
I just want to say that there are so many challenges. I mean, this is true with so many things in our world, but there's so many challenges in agriculture. There's and in so many different realms that are both like on the technical side, on the policy side, on the cultural side. Like, we need a huge team addressing them in different ways. And I think that the investment crew, I'll call it Iroquois Valley, and Dirt Capital are providing a really important service. In this region, we have many sort of legacy farms, farms that have been, you know, 4 or 5 generations that are very well capitalized and quite large parcels, right? A couple hundred acres and greater. And those farms often are producing, in terms of quantity, the most food for the community, and are really super important for, you know, seeing local food in a grocery store or in a restaurant or whatnot, because they have, you know, they're GAP certified, or they're Food Safety Modernization Act certified. They have the quantity and the systems in place to really be able to meet the standards of those grocers and whatnot, and they're sort of considered generally like a mid-scale farm. And those farms, when there isn't a next generation in place, they are very, very difficult to transition, those operations. And actually, this is something that we're working on in New York State right now, because even land that is conserved, that is protected from development with a conservation easement, even those parcels that we think, okay, we protected that farm, it's going to be a farm forever now, are not necessarily transitioning to another generation of farmers. And the reason for that is the price is still too high. And so what we're working on in New York State right now, and Massachusetts already does this to some extent, is to promote the use of easements with public dollars that make farmland permanently affordable to working farmers. And that keeping land at its agricultural value, and just as a shorthand, something that's going to be affordable to a working farmer is absolutely essential for transitioning these farms. Now I say that because that's something we're working towards. Some land trusts are already doing these types of easements, and in Massachusetts that is the case in large part. However, until more farms are protected in that way, I think those Iroquois Valley, Dirt Capital, Jacob Israel was on our board actually, are super critical, because what they're doing is they're purchasing some of these mid-scale farms when they are on the market and really very vulnerable to becoming estates, is essentially what we see, is that non-farmers are buying them and essentially turning them into estate properties, and they may rent them out to a farmer, but it's generally not a very equitable relationship, we'll just say, between the landowner, who's a non-farmer, and the farmer who's working the land. And what those investment guys have done is they'll come in and they'll buy land, in the case of Dirt Capital, they'll do a lease-to-own arrangement with the farmer. And that buys some more time, and it buys some more expertise to help essentially oftentimes put a working farm easement on that land to get it down to the agricultural value so the farmer can eventually own it. So I think, you know, what they're doing is really important. It's a really important tool and a financial tool to make sure that we, at this moment of transition, we have so many farmers at the age of retirement and many without successors, that we have an ability to, a financial tool to transition those farms to the next generation. It's very complicated, but you really do need real capital and intention to come into play to get those farms to the next generation.
Yes. And thank you so much. And I just want to add, I'm not sure if I remember like the original question, but the answer that came to mind to me was kind of about, well, if all these other things that we know of are not necessarily enough, what other things are happening? And I just thought about wanting to mention that, yeah, like the USDA microgrants aren't enough, all these other kinds of support programs aren't enough, there aren't enough scholarship positions at these agricultural schools, sometimes the agricultural schools are too far away. You know, there are all these other kinds of pieces. We know that there's a difference in our education systems, and so different folks have more, ease of accessing applications and all these other kinds of things that you have to do with the processes to make sure you are keeping up to USDA and whoever else's standards. But it does make me think about some people-to-people reparations things that are happening. And like if folks are interested in that, they could look, check out our website, soulfirefarm.org. There's a take action section, and there's a reparations map. And basically, it's a place where folks farmers who have needs, farmers of color all over, are like, hey, I'm just a regular person, I need some land, or I'm a regular person, I need some support with this kind of thing. And people who are in that area or have some other kind of way to give people things are like, hey, I'm looking to support somebody. And like to date, it's only been up maybe about a month, but there's already been like, I don't know, thousands of people have already visited the site. There's already been transfer of land and like money and other kinds of resources. And so that's the thing people can check out. And it made me think about your project, and like talking about being really new to this farm stand world, and like you already know how to make stuff happen. Obviously, like you've done so much, but it makes me just think about folks of color historically and marginalized people know how to make things happen. They just need like support in terms of resources, and really just giving up these resources that belong to folks of color already anyway. It's like the entire country was built by people of color, it's indigenous people's land, so people know the solutions. It's just about like how can we, with those of us who have resources, make sure that they get to people who need them, and not just giving charity, but actually making space. And so who are the decision makers? Who are the people who are on these boards? Who are the people who are employed? And like, yeah. So these are the things we gotta think about.
No, there's more questions.
Back there.
It's been touched on about the quality of the soil and making sure it's zoned, continuous farming. And I think we could talk about that some more, because lead paint was not illegal until 1970 or something. And there's a lot of contaminants that can get on the soil. And it would be really important to continue to make sure the land that is arable, that's good for farming, is still kept for farming. And we're dealing with that a lot in this area right now with industrial pollution and also just transitioning from right to farm to whether people can develop. If someone would like to talk about that a little bit.
Well, I just would say that, just on what, kind of touching on what you're talking about, I think that what we are up against are people, or a group of folks who really don't think or don't, we've broken down a lot of our moral kind of codes in many ways. And so we're dealing with people who don't necessarily have the same sense of justice or environmentalism that you might have. And so I'm not sure where you would, like, if you're looking for a solution, but I think that, over time, identifying, ways around problems or through them or under them, however you need to do it, is the way to go. I don't live in this area, so I don't really know what the problems are, but I'm sure, you're getting all of the blowback from the West, wherever those companies may reside at, and you're feeling the result of that. So, what is the solution? I really don't know. I just think that, it's good to know what you're up against and to really clarify the folks and the individuals and the corporations and the businesses that support the thing that you're not really feeling, and see what you need to do to work around it. And I would guess with this area, there's a lot of feisty people out here. So my guess is that, they're already working on that. You just got to identify them and figure out who they are and make it work.
They're probably in this room.
That's right.
I was wondering if any of you were interested in food waste and addressing problems on the farming or grocery level with food waste.
Go for it.
Well, we directly are dealing with some of that. Massachusetts has, you live in this state, so Massachusetts has a few laws in place that make it a requirement for certain types of waste producers to do something good with their waste. Now, we are living in times where enforcing those type of policies might be a little bit more difficult, as part of what the sister was saying in terms of where are the jobs. There could be a lot of opportunity there for there to be people who could actually begin to enforce that law and make sure that these people are not wasting their money or their doing something else with their waste instead of utilizing it as what it could be done. You have other countries that, burn their waste and they actually produce energy for their countries. We're like thinking way behind on some of this stuff. But I can say that, if it wasn't for the fact that people were more employed in the prison industrial system and all these other things, as I was saying, maybe there would be opportunities for people to begin to enforce some of these policies that are in place. Massachusetts is somewhat progressive when it comes to that type of stuff, environmental stuff. So I think there's more than enough spaces and ways to make that thing a reality. I just think that maybe, you should be the one who makes the policy and, make sure that it goes through its course to make it happen. Because the people who are kind of in power right now just are not really doing the job.
Yeah, ditto all that. Absolutely. I think I don't really have too much to say about it except just that us Soul Fire and like us, and I'm sure like all of y'all in the room, we don't want to see any waste. It's really whack and disgusting. I think, and that is the reason why we do the CSA, Community Supported Agriculture model. And just like that's rooted in, like I said, Booker T. Watley first came up with that idea with the clientele membership club, and he was like, this is great because we can just sell directly to people and then we won't have to worry about having all this excess and be unsure if people are going to buy it or not. And so we make sure we have a relationship with the folks who are eating our food and we don't see waste. And then if we have more food, we get to share that with more folks and friends, but we don't, waste is a problem. And I think, yeah, maybe other things is like folks could just like make more food together, and just share food and talk about issues like this with each other. And like I can't remember what country it is right now. I'm trying to look. Maybe it's Costa Rica. It may not be. Hopefully I can find it before we leave. But there's some country that it gives money or benefits to farmers who are doing positive like environmental things. And so like you were saying about policy, but yeah, I don't know, it's just some kind of way to incentivize like regenerative farming and farming that doesn't hurt the earth in the way that industrial agriculture does.
Mike, thank you all for being here, and thank you for bringing up the reparations map. I became aware of it through Harmony Homestead locally. Found it really inspiring, and I guess my question for all of you is what the vision moving forward is for centering the reparations project in terms of both the private land trust or peer-to-peer people, but also public advocacy, things like eminent domain or laws around sort of how land can be donated. So, any suggestions?
Yeah, Leah, who co-founded our farm, would have so much more to say about this than me. But what I can say is, I think one thing people can look at I think it's H240. I might be mixing it with the H2A Act, but it's like Resolution H40. It's regarding just like a study on reparations. And it's like a government policy that has been introduced, but has never been like supported and respected. It's like, why can't we just like study it? What's the problem? Nobody's even saying you need to give out money automatically. But the fact that we can't even study it, it just says a lot about where our nation is, especially if we consider that alongside all these other instances where we thought reparations were earned, like Holocaust survivors and Japanese internment, all these other kinds of issues where the US government has literally given reparations, but 300 years, 400 years, plus Jim Crow, plus what we're going through now, and still you can't even study it. So I think that's a piece. I think folks, in terms of like learning about things, I really like Ta-Nehisi Coates' case for reparations. Yeah, it just like kind of exposes a lot, and there are just so many folks in our country who don't value even the idea of considering reparations. They find it a laughable subject. Yeah, like most white folks are, according to some surveys that I read online, obviously they didn't poll everybody, but are just like absolutely against reparations. And so just talking to folks, white folk friends, and I'm happy you used that word, eminent domain. I wasn't sure if I was thinking of it right, but I was thinking about the space where your farm was and how after 7 to 8 years of so much work on that space that was probably like left with no concern before, that it was just able to be taken away, and just how deplorable that is. And we just still see these instances of land grabbing from folks of color. And so I know that there's a project that's being worked on with the Northeast Farmers of Color, with the Black Farmers Network, that's around like major land trust things. And I think that there's something on our website or in the resource section that probably will say a lot more than I could have just shared. So check it out.
Well, I would only add that, perhaps some of the options that are found on that website in terms of the local things that people could do would be beneficial. We have a listing on the site. Maybe I need to clarify and edit it a little bit, but we definitely have one on there, and the hope is that somebody will reach out and help make that happen. I like the peer-to-peer thing. I'm, thinking that the effort that it's going to take to maybe push this along through our current representatives would be a little bit more of a struggle. But I don't ever think that, it's not possible. But it's a necessary thing, and I think my sister here talked about healing and the importance of that for all of us as a nation, because it never happened. And so there is, it's an important piece in terms of the things that need to happen in our country. It has to take place. And there has to be more sensitivity to the people who have suffered and who have continued to suffer in our nation. And I think that this, having this as an option for people to have a conscience is a good thing. And it's going to take some difficulty on everybody's part. It's going to take some sacrifice on many of the white folks' part in this. But that's necessary. And I think that on the other side of that, there's something beautiful that could be built. So that's what we look forward to.
the thing that I can perhaps just add to this from our experience at Young Farmers Coalition is just the reality that it really, there are unique challenges being a person of color getting into food and farming that are very real, whether it's dealing with the USDA, the issues with USDA were one-on-one issues oftentimes with loan officers or with, and these, the farmer community, the committees that were approving loans for Black folks in the South in terms of land loss and to this day. And the USDA, to its credit, has done a lot to try to diversify those committees, the farmer committees. They do extensive outreach efforts and whatnot. They have an office of outreach. They've taken a lot of steps, but the culture is there in many communities still that just makes it difficult. And so I think we need to recognize that and be upfront about that and talk about it and try to address it. And I think, for people of color, for immigrants, we recently, Young Farmers Coalition put up a calculator we released this week. It's a data visualization, and it's called Finding Farmland. You can check it out at findingfarmland.org. And the reason we built this calculator is because we wanted to help young people be able to access farmland and be able to compare financing options. So over time, they're able to save money and are making smart decisions. Also to make sure that they know that they could potentially get a farm service agency loan, or they could put a conservation easement or a working farm easement on their property and bring down the cost. We just wanted full transparency in looking at buying a farm. And it is a very helpful tool to many people, but I got an email from a good friend of mine who came to the United States as a young person from Mexico and is not a citizen, and he said, this is a calculator for people of privilege, right? And I was like, yes it is. Why? Yes it is. Because it's true, not only, as much as the calculator may illuminate what is possible and the best path to being able to purchase a farm, if none of the opportunities in that calculator are available to you, particularly with credit, you can't buy that farm. The other thing that, in part, my response to him after really looking at it again was to say, okay, this calculator, as much as it's presenting opportunities, it's also really highlighting the barriers, whether that's price or citizenship or whatever else might be out there. So I just am saying that to know, I guess, just to reiterate that there are some unique challenges that are very real, and we need to find ways to overcome them. And the reparations map and other projects like that are thinking creatively about how to provide community member to community member support are so important, and a little can really go a long way.
Good, so these are the slips at the end of the pews and take a pen and write down 3 topics that you'd like to see discussed at the roundtables, and we'll compile them and put them all together. A couple of announcements before lunch, and then I want to thank our speakers again. We have lots of moderators here, and I think they're all in the room. If you need a slip, raise your hand and we'll get one to you, or if you need a pen. So I want to introduce the moderators to you for the roundtables so you can think about what they do and maybe what themes they could help you discuss. So Amanda Brown is just over here. She is currently running the UMass Student Farm, and she does lots of other things. Stephen Browning is over here. He's the chef at Prairie Whale restaurant in town. Will Conklin, who's there, is the executive director of Greenagers. Elena Coons here. She's a Simmons Rock alum, and she's a doctoral candidate in ecopsychology. Mark Firth here is the owner of Prairie Whale restaurant in Bergton. Morgan Ovitsky up front here is the project coordinator of Be Well Berkshires. And finally, Jessica Vecchia is the director of Alchemy Initiative in Pittsfield. So those are all our moderators. You can find their details on the flip side of the program. They'll be running the roundtables this afternoon based on the themes that you choose now, and we'll collect those before you go to lunch. I want to say that it's a delicious lunch that's just in the dining hall, so behind us. If you don't have a pink lunch ticket, make sure you get one. Unless you're a Simons Rock student, you don't need one. Make sure you do that before you leave. And lastly, I want to introduce Jeffrey Blaugrund from Braiseworthy, because he wanted to say a couple of words.
Hi, my name is Jeff Blaugrund. I've got a company called Braiseworthy. We make pre-made frozen meals sourcing local ingredients, no additives. So basically, we put a farmer's market in your freezer when you don't have time to cook. We are going to be relaunching coming into the spring and fall. I'd invite people over lunch, come on up to me, introduce yourself. If you're interested in possible part-time work or an internship, I'd love to talk to you about that. Discuss what we're doing about some food insecurity. What we're trying to do about food insecurity. And yeah, if you have any other questions about it, we'll have some upcoming events also for tastings if you're interested in trying our food. And you can come to me and talk to me about that.
Great.
Thank you.
And lastly, I want to thank very much our speakers this morning, Ibrahim Ali and Lindsay Lushishud and Amani Al-Bala, and we want to gratefully thank them for sharing what they've shared with us today. So thank you. And they're happy to talk more and share email addresses and contact information, so please come up and ask, and we'll connect you with them. And so on to lunch, and also in Fisher, which is this building right over here, during lunch there's great student posters you can look at. There's also going to be a honey tasting, and you can look at our fish production and our greenhouse. So I invite you to do that after you've eaten your lunch, wander over to Fisher, and that's where the afternoon sessions will be, in Fisher. So leave the sheets with your suggested topics either in the pews or hand them up to the registration desk on the way out. And we'll see you at lunch. Thank you.
Please check out the Reparations Night and Fun, Ibrahim's Gardening the Community Project. We need that.